At dawn on April 19, 1775, a column of British redcoats marched out of Boston. Their orders were clear: seize colonial weapons hidden at Concord and arrest rebel leaders. They moved quietly along the road, more than 700 men, confident and disciplined. But ahead of them, word had already spread. Bells rang, drums beat, and farmers grabbed their muskets. By sunrise, a small band of colonial militia, 77 men, stood waiting on Lexington Green. The British officers shouted for them to lay down their arms. The colonists refused. For a long moment, both sides stood in silence, guns raised, but no one willing to start the killing. Then somewhere, no one knew from which side, a single shot rang out. In that instant, the world changed. The British fired a volley, dropping 8 colonists in seconds. The militia scattered, but the spark had been lit. The first battle of the American Revolution had begun. The redcoats continued toward Concord, burning supplies and searching houses. But now the countryside was alive with resistance. From behind fences, walls, and trees, thousands of farmers and townsmen fired on the retreating British. The narrow roads became a trap. By the time the redcoats reached Boston that night, they had suffered more than 270 casualties. The colonies had stood their ground against the empire, and they would never turn back. This was no longer protest or politics. It was war. Within days of Lexington and Concord, militia from across New England poured into the area around Boston. They surrounded the city, cutting the British off by land. What had begun as scattered fighting became a siege. In June 1775, the British tried to break out at Bunker Hill. They won the ground, but at a terrible cost, more than 1,000 casualties. It proved that the colonists could stand against regular troops. By July, George Washington arrived from Virginia to take command of what was now called the Continental Army. His soldiers were farmers, blacksmiths, and laborers, brave but undisciplined, with little training and few supplies. Washington spent the rest of the year turning them into an army. Both sides dug in through the cold winter, neither able to move. Inside the city, the British grew short on food and firewood. Outside, the Americans waited. Then, in March 1776, cannons captured from Fort Ticonderoga arrived. Washington's men dragged them by sled across snow and ice to the hills overlooking the harbor. When they placed them on Dorchester Heights, the British suddenly found themselves under American guns. Facing destruction, they evacuated the city by ship on March 17th. Boston was free. The colonies had forced one of the world's strongest armies to retreat. Their revolution had survived its first great test. In London, the reaction was swift and furious. The government declared the colonies in open rebellion. King George III vowed to crush the uprising. Britain prepared the largest expeditionary force it had ever sent overseas, more than 30,000 soldiers supported by hundreds of ships. The world's most powerful navy was on the move. That summer in 1776, British troops under General William Howe landed on Staten Island near New York. Across the river, Washington's army waited, only 20,000 men, many without shoes, powder, or uniforms. When the British attacked on August 27th at the Battle of Long Island, the result was disaster. The Americans were outflanked and routed. Thousands were captured or killed. New York City fell within days. But Washington refused to give up. In one of the most daring moves of the war, he evacuated his entire army across the East River under cover of fog and darkness. Not a single man was lost. The British believed the rebellion was nearly over. The Continental Army reduced to a few thousand hungry soldiers retreating through New Jersey. But in that army marched a leader who would not quit. By Christmas, the revolution seemed finished. The colonies were divided, and the British flag flew over every major port. Yet beneath the cold, Washington planned a counterstrike that would reignite hope. The empire had won the battles, but not the war. By December of 1776, the American cause was nearly dead. Washington's army had dwindled to just a few thousand men, tired, hungry, and ready to go home. Their enlistments would expire in days. Winter had frozen both the weather and the revolution. But on Christmas night, Washington took a risk that changed everything. In darkness and snow, he led 2,400 soldiers across the icy Delaware River. The wind cut through their clothes as they pushed the boats forward, ice cracking against the hulls. Some men had no shoes, their feet wrapped in rags. When they reached the New Jersey shore, they marched 9 miles through sleet toward Trenton. At dawn on December 26th, they attacked a garrison of Hessian mercenaries, German troops hired by Britain. The surprise was total. Within an hour, the Americans captured nearly 1,000 prisoners while losing only a few men. The victory electrified the colonies. A week later, Washington struck again, this time at Princeton. The British army chased him north, thinking he was retreating, but he turned and attacked from the flank. Once again, the British were driven from the field. 2 quick victories in the dead of winter revived the revolution spirit. Washington had proven that courage and strategy could overcome power and numbers. The message spread through the colonies. The Americans could win. The war for independence had found its leader. In the summer of 1777, Britain launched a new plan to end the rebellion. General John Bergen would march south from Canada with a large army, seizing control of the Hudson River and cutting off New England from the rest of the colonies. It looked perfect on paper, but in war, paper plans rarely survive. Bergen's army moved slowly through forests and swamps, dragging heavy cannons and supply wagons. He expected help from General Howe in New York, but Howe marched toward Philadelphia instead. Alone and running low on supplies, Bergen advanced toward Saratoga and straight into an American trap. American forces under General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold blocked his path. After 2 fierce battles, the British were surrounded. Bergen tried to break out but failed. On October 17th, he surrendered more than 6,000 men. Saratoga changed everything. It was the first time a full British army had been captured in the war. The victory shocked Europe and proved that the Americans were more than rebels. They were a real army capable of defeating a world power. News of Saratoga reached France within weeks. The French government, long hostile to Britain, saw its chance for revenge. Diplomats in Paris began secret talks with Benjamin Franklin, preparing to join the war. The American Revolution was about to become international. After Saratoga, the world took notice. In early 1778, France recognized American independence and signed a formal alliance with the new United States. The French Navy joined the fight, bringing warships, supplies, and money. Soon, Spain and the Dutch Republic followed, declaring war on Britain as well. Suddenly, the conflict that had begun on the fields of Massachusetts spread across the globe. British fleets fought French and Spanish ships in the Caribbean, the Mediterranean, and even the Indian Ocean. The Royal Navy, once dominant, was now stretched thin trying to defend an empire on every continent. For the Americans, French involvement changed the war overnight. France sent experienced officers, artillery, and gunpowder. French soldiers trained Washington's men, and French gold kept the revolution alive. In 1780, a full French army under General Rochambeau arrived to fight beside the Americans. What had started as a colonial uprising had become a world war. Britain, the greatest empire of the age, now faced enemies everywhere. The 13 colonies had found powerful allies, and the struggle for independence had turned into a fight that would reshape the world. By the end of 1778, the British High Command changed strategy. After years of fighting in the north with little success, they turned their attention to the south. London believed the southern colonies were full of loyalists who would welcome British control. If the army could secure Georgia and the Carolinas, the rebellion would collapse. The campaign began well. Savannah fell in 1778, and by May of 1780, Charleston, South Carolina, was captured along with more than 5,000 American troops, the largest American surrender of the war. General Charles Cornwallis, confident and aggressive, pushed inland and crushed a smaller American force at Camden that August. It seemed the South was lost. But victory brought new problems. The British controlled the cities but not the countryside. Across the Carolinas, small bands of local fighters struck back. Men like Francis Marion, known as the Swamp Fox, used guerrilla tactics, hitting supply convoys, burning bridges, and vanishing into the forests and swamps. These partisans turned the war into a civil conflict. Neighbors took sides. Towns split in two. The fighting was savage and personal, far from the orderly battles of Europe. Each British advance created new enemies. The Americans began winning small but costly fights at Cowpens and Kings Mountain. Cornwallis realized he could not hold the South without destroying Washington's northern allies. In early 1781, he marched north into Virginia, hoping to trap the Continental forces before French help could arrive. Instead, he was marching into the final trap of the war. In the summer of 1781, Washington finally saw his chance to end the war. The British Army under General Cornwallis had moved into Yorktown, Virginia, a small port on the Chesapeake Bay. Cornwallis believed the Royal Navy would protect his position and resupply his troops, but Washington and his French allies had other plans. The key was the sea. French Admiral de Grasse sailed north from the Caribbean with a powerful fleet. In September, his ships clashed with the British Navy off the Virginia Capes and forced it to retreat. The Chesapeake was now sealed. Cornwallis was trapped and Washington knew it. Leaving a small force near New York to fool the British, Washington secretly marched his army south, more than 400 miles in less than a month. Alongside him marched General Rochambeau's French troops, well-trained and fully supplied. By late September, the combined American and French armies, nearly 16,000 strong, surrounded Yorktown by land while de Grasse's fleet blocked the bay. The British were cut off from escape. For 3 weeks, cannons and mortars pounded Cornwallis's defenses. Trenches crept closer every night. British soldiers fought bravely but knew the end was near. Food ran short, ammunition ran out, and disease spread. On October 19, 1781, Cornwallis surrendered more than 7,000 men. The British band played "The World Turned Upside Down" as his troops laid down their weapons. Yorktown was not the largest battle of the war, but it was the final one that mattered. When word reached London, even the king knew the fight was lost. The greatest empire on earth had been defeated by its own colonies. The American Revolution was over. Even after Yorktown, the guns did not fall silent immediately. Fighting continued at sea and in far corners of the empire. But the heart of the war, the struggle for the 13 colonies, was finished. In Britain, Parliament turned against the war. The cost was too high and the goal no longer clear. Ministers resigned. The king himself finally agreed to peace talks. Negotiations opened in Paris in 1782. American diplomats Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay sat across from British representatives. The talks dragged on for months, as both sides argued over borders, debts, and fishing rights. But the outcome was never in doubt. The British Empire was ready to let go. On September 3, 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Britain formally recognized the independence of the United States and ceded territory all the way to the Mississippi River. After 8 long years, the war that began with a single shot at Lexington was finally over. The Redcoats went home. Washington resigned his command and returned to Mount Vernon. The colonies had become a nation, one that had fought the world's strongest power and won. The American Revolution had ended not just a war, but an empire. The British Empire lost the war not because it lacked strength, but because it misunderstood the fight. From the beginning, London believed the rebellion was small, that most colonists were loyal, and only a few radicals stirred trouble. In truth, support for independence spread through every colony. Britain overestimated loyalist numbers and underestimated the determination of the people they were trying to subdue. They also misjudged American leadership. George Washington, though often outnumbered, never allowed his army to be destroyed. He learned from every defeat, retreating when needed and striking only when the odds favored him. His discipline turned a group of volunteers into a real army. Distance played a major role. Every order, supply shipment, and message had to cross 3,000 miles of ocean. Reinforcements took months to arrive, and news from the front was always weeks old. The British could win battles, but they could not maintain control over such vast territory. Then came France. French money, ships, and soldiers transformed the war from a rebellion into a global conflict. Britain suddenly had to fight not just the colonies, but France, Spain, and the Dutch as well. Even with the best army and navy of the age, no empire could fight on that many fronts. In the end, the British were not defeated by weapons alone. They were defeated by will. The Americans simply refused to give up. The American Revolution reshaped the modern world. It was the first time a group of colonies had overthrown an empire and built a nation on their own terms. It proved that ideas, liberty, equality, and self-government could outlast the armies sent to crush them. The cost was enormous. More than 25,000 Americans died for independence, and many more were wounded or left homeless. Towns were burned, families divided, and economies shattered. Yet from those ruins came something entirely new, a republic built on the belief that ordinary people could choose their own leaders and shape their own future. Britain survived the loss and went on to build new parts of its empire elsewhere, but it never forgot the lesson of America. Power alone cannot rule forever. Even the strongest empire can fall when those it governs no longer accept its authority. The United States emerged not yet a power, but a promise. Its survival proved that freedom could be defended and that a new nation could rise from rebellion. The war that began with a single shot on Lexington Green ended with a peace treaty signed across the ocean. The empire that once ruled the world had been broken by its own colonies, and in their victory, a new chapter of history began.